Good morning. How are you today? Thank you. So this is day 1 of Afrolution. I'm really excited because we have been cooperating with quite a few partners, one of them being the Berlin Biennale, the big art show. And this panel this morning, Afrofeminisms, Bridging the Gap, is a cooperation panel with the Berlin Biennale. The wonderful women present, their works are also available on the book table in the back, to the left, where Ricky Reiser is. And I'm now going to hand over to Tessa Hart, and I'm really thrilled. And Antje Weitzel of Biennale is here, so is June Drevet. So again, thank you so much for the cooperation. It has been a ton of fun. All right, enjoy.
So yes, good morning also from me. My name is Tessa and I'm going to be moderating today's event. Yes, and I'm very, very excited about, as probably all of you are, about the fantastic lineup we have. A couple of words, what we are talking about today. Afrofeminist thought is a comprehensive and historically based intervention that bridges decolonial analysis with intersectionality from an African and African diasporic positioning. And we are very, very excited to have this lineup here today. And I'm sure you all know many things. You've probably read works from these people already, but I'd like to give a quick introduction with really just a couple of excerpts of everything they have all done. And I will actually start with our digital guest, so we can include you. Oh, actually, yes, we look into the camera to see you, but you are up here. But hello, Fania Noël, who's joining us from New York, where it's 4 a.m., I believe. Yeah. So fantastic you can be here. And to give you a bit of context about Fania Noël, Fania is a Haitian-born French Afrofeminist organizer, thinker, and writer living in New York, where she is a PhD candidate in sociology at the New School for Social Research. Her area of research are African studies, critical race theory, black feminism, materialist feminism, and capitalism studies. And she has also been the co-founder and editorial director of the political journal on intersectionality, Revue ACG, and member of Moissy collective Afrofeminist. And in 2021, she joined the Black Feminist Futures Board of Directors. And this year, very recently in March, her book, Power Now, an Afrofeminist Political Horizon, was published. So welcome very much, Fania. And next, I would like to introduce, present here today, Dr. Tiffany Florvil. Hello. Tiffany is an associate professor of history at the University of New Mexico in the USA. And Tiffany, amongst many others, has co-edited Rethinking Black German Studies, Approaches, Interventions, and Histories in 2018. Her manuscript, Mobilizing Black Germany, Afro-German Women and the Making of a Transnational Movement, won the Waterloo Center for German Studies First Book Prize in 2021. And she is also the founder and editor of the Imagining Black Europe book series. So also to you, Tiffany, welcome very much. Next, I'll go in order that we're sitting here. Also, welcome very much Dr. Pumla Dineo Gqola. Pumla is a feminist author and professor at Nelson Mandela University. Her 7 books, we're just going to mention a few, include, amongst others, What is Slavery to Me? A landmark study of post-colonial slave memory in post-apartheid South Africa. There's also Rape, a South African Nightmare, which won the 2016 Sunday Times Ellen Patton Award. And there's Female Fear Factory, which also the 2022 National Institute for Humanities and Social Science Best Non-Fiction monograph. And Pumla also graduated from the University of Cape Town in South Africa, the University of Warwick in UK, and Ludwig Maximilians Universität in Germany. So also to you, welcome. We're glad to have you here. And also joining us today is Dr. Emilia Roig, founder and director of the Center for Intersectional Justice in Berlin. And she holds a PhD from Humboldt University in Berlin and Sciences Po Lyon, and has also taught intersectionality, critical race theory, feminism, post-colonial studies, as well as international and European law in Germany, France, and the USA. And she gives keynotes, lectures across Europe, and is the author of various and many publications, most recently, of course, Why We Matter in 2022. So also to you, Emilia.
Hello, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Welcome.
Oui. Ouais.
Yes, so thank you. Fania, can you also hear us?
Yeah, sorry, I thought that I was speaking just with one person.
All good, all good. We're so glad it's working out on a technical level to have you here. Bienvenue.
Okay. Merci.
Yes, brilliant. So now that we're all introduced and set up, I have, of course, prepared a universe of topics and questions to talk about today. But as a bit of an opening, I'd love to hear from all of you a quick introduction. For you personally, when was your Black or African or Afrofeminist awakening? And how was that? How did that unfold and develop? Yeah, and maybe Fania, as you are furthest away from us, maybe you want to start with a little bit of insight.
Yeah, I think in the question that I get asked often, I think people imagine some kind of like in a Star Wars, like you have the Force Awakening to when you become a Jedi from a Padawan, but it didn't happen like that. And I talk about that in the introduction of my first book. I think that more like a wave, like wave. So wave of radicalization of my political consciousness. So wave that start small, like seed when I was a teenager, and wave after wave, political mobilization around social right in France, about the march of being high school student movement, Black movement, anti-police violence, and even anti-police slash movement, anti-carceral movement, movement for a worker, anti-xenophobic and immigration and law movement. So I think I will more like wave, like small and big, sometimes really big. 2005 uprising in the suburb was a big wave, but sometimes have really quiet wave inside of yourself, the way that you see your relationship to other, particularly to men or to non-Black people, the way you see yourself, and the way that like Jordan said, that you would no longer accept to be anybody fool, and you will just live in hostility when faced hostility. So have quiet wave, intimate wave, and have big wave, a political one. So more likely.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really beautiful way of putting it as well. These different waves, really, of awakening. And Tiffany, how was it for you?
I'll try to follow up.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Got a few minutes.
Yeah, that was very beautiful. That'll be hard to follow up after. I think the wave metaphor is apt. I think certainly always knew that I was feminist and Afrofeminist in some capacity. My mom certainly wouldn't have called herself a feminist, even though she was. So she was an immigrant from the Caribbean, coming to the US, learning how to deal with the US politics, racial politics in particular, class politics. And so how she raised me, how I was brought up, I think was very sort of feminist, sort of very empowering, very much tied to having agency, not letting anyone hold her back, coming over at a young age to the US and coming over alone. So I think all of that has informed my feminist sensibilities, my Afrofeminist sensibilities. And then also learning through, learning in college more, having the vocabulary to sort of describe what types of feminists I was engaging with and who I was, and then developing more of a political and diasporic consciousness. I would say sort of for the latter, the sort of diasporic and political consciousness, there was not necessarily an awakening, but there was something when I lived in Germany as like a high school student, as like 18 or 19, where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so Black and different. So there's an interesting sort of Blackness that I realized that I had, even though I realized I had it in the U.S. So I'm also from Florida, which has its own legacy with migrants, especially with like Haitian migrants. My dad's Haitian, my mom's from Trinidad. So all of this is sort of involved in my political consciousness, but then reorienting myself while here in an entirely sort of white space. I lived in Hamburg. I was like one of a few Black people there, and so realizing, oh my God, I'm Black. So like I knew I was Black, but I'm black here. I'm like, I'm Black, I can't go back. So, and then sort of just like the microaggressions that would emerge, and, like you're hanging out, the things that would happen at my gymnasium also like created a sense of like political consciousness, like, wow, Germans are racist. Whoa. Like, wow, this would happen in different ways in the US. So I think all of this, like it would happen, but it would not happen in the way that it transpired in the German context. So I think all of that continued to sort of like inform my feminist consciousness, my diasporic consciousness, and quite frankly, all of that is politicized. It can't be. Those are all inextricably linked for me. And so that continues to grow. And then I think also with my research interests, I'm interested in Afrofeminism. I'm interested in the contours of the diaspora in the German context and in Europe more broadly, and how that shapes different forms of Afrofeminism in contexts across the continent of Europe, and why that matters. And so I think all of this informs like my own sort of Afrofeminist sensibility. So that was a long-winded, I was like,
thank you so much.
Blackety-black, and then I'm like long-winded. But
So we've had waves, we've had the context, change in context that changed so much. And Pumla, same question for you. Like, what was your waking up, realizing, connecting to Afrofeminisms?
Thank you, Tessa. I actually thought that was really beautiful and poetic and joyful. So thank you. I'm South African. So I was born into apartheid South Africa. So there isn't a point at which I wasn't aware of my Blackness. The entire world of my childhood was built around different senses of my own Blackness. So I've always known I was Black. I was raised by a mother who was explicitly Pan-Africanist, so it was also very important, and by a father who was explicitly Black consciousness. So in the politics, so there was a very, I suppose in my very socialization, there was a very particular way in which I was introduced into a sense of myself as a person in the world. And it wasn't so my initial kind of introduction to myself as Black and as white, or socialization into it, isn't from necessarily, it's from different places. So right, so the superstructural definition of Black, of my sense as a Black and as an African girl in the world, was communicating one set of things, right? But you're also living in I was living on the continent, I was living in a country on the continent, I was living in predominantly or exclusively Black in a kind of black residential context, so I was never not aware of it. So that's, and of course, part of what happens when you live in a society and you live in a community that's exclusively black is that your sense of what blackness and Africanness is not. It's also a sense of kind of occupying multiple universes, which aren't necessarily about wounding and lack. They're about vibrancy and joy and being and automatically being expected to speak multiple languages and understand things like kind of different conceptual universes. So I think that's really important, right? As well as part of kind of thinking about how we socialize into Africanness and black. So that was the one thing. But of course, I also grew up in a very strange town within the apartheid imaginary because I grew up on a historically black university. And a historically black university, which is a very significant one in terms of the history of the academy on the African continent, because it educated, one of the things that Forte always claims is like, we are the only university in the world that's graduated 5 African presidents, right? So it's important not just in terms of the South African imaginary, it's important also in terms of the kind of continental education imaginary. And what that meant as someone who was born in December 1972, was that there were Namibian students, there were Ghanaian students, there were Ugandan students, there were students of different places in the world, and it was also a university that was very politicized. So as a child, there were people were hiding in our, so I could go on and on. So in terms of blackness and Pan-African, I always had a sense of myself then as there was something wrong with the particular definition of blackness that was being foisted on me. That was immediate, like the people I was talking to and bumping into who were, who were very indulgent, who were very precocious girl. So there was that sense of kind of an affirmation of a blackness that wasn't just in my town and in my, but of course it was also a very politicized campus. So while you're running around trying to play, you're inhaling tear gas all the time. There are people in your yard, and you're being woken up in the middle of the night because people, the networks of kind of people moving around. So that's the blackness and the Africanness. And then I don't know when I wasn't a feminist, but I do know that I think I've always been a feminist. I know that I started calling myself a feminist at 15, and that was within the context of a range of kind of anti-apartheid women's organizing. And specifically, I remember specifically the week I discovered the word was within the context of women who were all women and men, but women specifically, who were organizing against there were thousands of children in detention in apartheid South Africa. And it was specifically within that context. So and then of course, as I grew older, then the senses of what that means to be an African feminist, to be a black feminist, to be a feminist in the world, and how that Pan-African consciousness articulates itself in my different forms of work in student politics, in my academic work, in my creative work, and so on, has shifted and changed in a variety of ways. I'm going to stop there because I feel like I've been talking for 500 years.
No, thank you for this wonderful insight into that journey and even putting it so briefly, which was probably a lot more. Yeah, thank you, Pumla.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really great to have listened to all of you. And so I'm trying to bring in, because I could find myself in a lot of what you all said. And I think what spoke to me most was the contextualization, right? Of you saying, oh, I'm coming in Germany and I'm black, black, black. And I think I've been navigating blackness in this way through the fact that I am biracial. And I've been conscious of this since the moment I can remember, as a little girl with my mother who's black, 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 and seeing as well what kind of that I escaped through my light skin and through my hair, that I escaped a lot of the racism that she was facing and that my older sister was facing because she had different hair. She has Afro-textured hair, and so for me, I think I had a very clear identity. I knew, okay, I'm Black, and this is who I am. I mean, I can't, and even if I'm light-skinned, I know that the world sees me as such. But in the French context, and especially in the French Caribbean context, in Martinique, colorism is so brutal, and it's still so ingrained in society and in the way we're perceived, and that sometimes it felt difficult for me to fully embrace the Black identity, because it felt like I was taking something that, that I had been excluded of, and derived privileges from that exclusion. And so that was quite a difficult thing to navigate. It's also in France, because the socialization is also very colorist due to the colonial present and the colonial past of France. And then I came to, I lived in London and I lived in Germany, and then it was clear that people saw me as Black, and that was a shift for me, because I realized that there could be as well a unified Black community. And the most marked example of that was when I went to New York with my mother and my sisters, one of my sisters, and there, for the very first time of our life, we were considered a whole. So all of us, we were the same family, we were not seen as the Black mother and the mixed race children, and it was something that touched us all so deeply, because for the first time, we were not separated by a racist system, by a colorist system. And we enjoyed it so much. So we went to Caribbean parties in New York. We went to, we enjoyed it so much. We went to Alvina Lay Dance Center. We took dance classes together. We just had the whole experience. And then when it comes to, and so here now in Germany, and I want to go past generations as well, seeing that there is something, a transgenerational trauma that has been ingrained in a lot of Black people, in I think most Black people in Martinique. I want to speak of Martinique, but I think it's something that is generalized in post-slavery societies, where the aim is to get whitened, to whiten yourself more and more with each generation. And that's something that is so deeply ingrained that it's sometimes difficult to escape. And I can see it in my family. So now I have children. I have one son now who is from a white father, and so I see him as white passing, but he sees himself as Black. So when we're on the street, or he very clearly identifies himself as Black, and he sees himself as Black, and a lot of people tell me, no, he's not white passing, come on. And I'm like, I don't know. But anyways, and so I think it's just like this, the contextualization, the history, trying to understand where does it come from, like where do we, how can we invest our Blackness and have this sense of belonging while being aware of our position as well in the map of power, in the map of of Blackness, which is not homogeneous. And I think that's something important that also needs to be emphasized in a German context. And I think it's happening as well. But And then when it comes to feminism, I've always been very angry I think the position of women in our society, in my family, in the position of my mother with my father as a Black woman with a white, so my father is a white Jew. So seeing this constellation has always made me feel very angry, and not only in this context, but also in the context of my grandparents in Martinique, where I saw that my grandmother was living in a very subordinate position, and that she was accepting this with so much, with a sense of pride somehow. And I think this came as well from the fact that colonialist societies have imposed gender norms, that have imposed a nuclear family as a sign of civilization, as a sign of superior, superior status, right? So Black people who adopt the nuclear family, Black people who adopt the heterosexual gendered norms also occupy a higher position, right? And so I think this is what I saw as a form of pride of, oh, look at us, we're civilized. We're civilized because we're married, because we have children within marriage, because we live in a very gendered context where my grandmother stayed at home. My grandfather forbade her to work her entire life. And it's still something that she feels really sad about and really frustrated about, but it was like the price to pay as well to be accepted to access some level of perceived whiteness, I guess. And so feminism, and maybe one last thing, because I think it's important for me to state that as an intersectional feminist, I've, for a very long time, kind of discarded feminists of the second wave, of the first and second wave, looking at them like, those white women who didn't understand any of what Black women, what queer people were experiencing. Not all of them, but at least I had this image. And so I kind of discarded them and focused entirely on Black feminism and Afrofeminism. So that was my entry door to feminism. I'm so grateful for this. But 10 years down the line, I start to rediscover feminism of the second wave, and I want to say it's full of treasures. It's so empowering to read their work and to kind of also understand the context in which it emerged, and to not succumb to the temptation of throwing the baby with the bathwater and just like not understanding that it's a very organic process that has brought us here, and that has brought as well Afrofeminism.
Yeah, thank you for these amazing insights. Because we've heard like a little introduction to all of your journeys, and they've come from such different contexts, but at the same time, there's so much shared elements of that journey. And this is exactly also what we want to be looking at and talking about today, as well as also these differences of experiences. And I'm glad Fania is back. You had briefly disappeared from our screen and we were a bit concerned, but yay. And then we've heard a lot of different terms as well now. Black feminism, African feminism, intersectional feminism. And the title of the event, of course, is Afrofeminisms. And I'd love to just delve a bit into that, and maybe Fania, because you've also just, as we've heard, written Power Now, an Afrofeminist political horizon. Like, for you, Fania, what are the specifics for you of Afrofeminism, like this specifically, and its context and its connections and development? Maybe you can give us a couple of words about that.
I think that the specificity of that is that it's important, like Sarah Ned said, where we find feminism, but also has a political movement where we built, and stem political genealogy and political ideology and theory. So Afrofeminism is more likely to suit the context in France, but many countries in Europe had Black identity is really linked to a sense of loyalty toward another territory. So because of the predominantly every Black person in France, predominantly to exception Black people with adoptive parents, they all have another territory to project themselves as identity. So me, my family from Haiti. So the co-founder of Moissy from Congo, a member from Martinique, Guadeloupe, Guyane, Senegal, Cameroon, etc., etc. So I think the word Afro capture that, and not like the US, we don't have some kind of big core of Black people sharing a long history over four centuries. So we are the constellation of neocolonialism and the product of neocolonialism, of immigration, and wave again of immigration. So the term Afro, it's capture that. It's capture how we make sense of identity, of Black identity in the French context, where being Black and French, or being Black in France, even though you're not French, is linked to the contour of the relationship that France, hexagonal France, has with other territory. That those territories could be from colonization, slavery, or neocolonization, like Guadeloupe, Martinique, Guyana, and all the ultramarine. So Afrofeminism is capturing that. Is capturing the genealogy on the context of where this kind of feminism was born, but it's not mean that what we said in Wasi and what I say in my book, and it is something that I'm really strong about, that we are not a movement, we are not a Black movement inside of the feminist movement, we are a feminist movement inside of the Black movement. And it's really important because it means in terms of genealogy, we not consider ourselves as another wave of feminism in the context of French feminism, but we consider ourselves as a other wave of anti-racism and blackness and blackness. So we consider ourselves in terms of genealogy, in the genealogy of anti-colonial politics, in the genealogy from the Haitian Revolution, in the genealogy of refusal and contestation of French power. So it's really an important thing to say that we're not another wave of feminists, but we are a restructuration of something, a different type of politics, a different type of Black politics. And that means that our Black politics, or Black feminism, Afrofeminist politics, it's anchored in a sense of Pan-Africanism. It's anchored in a sense of transnational solidarity, and it's anchored also in a term of theory. Have the genealogy we came from is from the Caribbean, the West African, also in conversation with Black feminists in the US, in the UK, and also in Canada, and also the Black feminism in Latin America. And it's really, really important to state that because it's generative on other kind of politics. It means that we don't have any capacity, we don't have a really strong care about what will happen to France as a state nation. It means that we don't, the fight is not to be seen as Black and French, or see that we are French and we represent the nation. The meaning is that what we build is the global Black power, and if French state nation is on the way, it's on this way, but it's not, the meaning is not to be Black French, it's not to be recognized as Black French, but to be free as Black person globally. So it means to the end of the war, build another one. So this is a really important that make a difference with kind of neoliberal politics, even though we fight for citizenship, equality, but the meaning is not to kind of save France from its own racism and make that everyone can be French.
Yeah, thank you so much. For those wonderful ways of putting it. And I meant to say also, if ever you want to react to anything that someone else is saying, feel free to also just jump in. You don't have to formally wait for my questions. But yeah, something else, like a big question, my biggest question in the phrasing of the day is something I'd like to get into. Because of course there is a systemic violence against women and also against those socialized as women, against all of those facing gender discrimination of any sort, that is both physically and mentally just ingrained into patriarchy and into the system we're living in, whether it's through marriage, through schools, through laws, through the history telling, and so much further. And really all of your works highlight the importance of these discourses happening, for one, on lots of different levels, whether it's family, whether it's school, social life, professional lives, working life, but also in different areas. I mean, you also have works that go from cultural, artistic work to academic work, but it's also in medical sector, public sector, service sectors. And as we're talking about specifically also today on a transnational level as well. And maybe, Pumla, maybe you can also talk a bit about how can in your experience, how can we connect over those shared experiences and dynamics and battles, but also without appropriating or undermining the differences also of our experiences or of others' experiences in these contexts?
So I think, thank you, Tessa. That's a very big and difficult question. So I'm going to see if I can come at it obliquely somewhat. I mean, I think that just following on from what Fania was saying in terms of how we think about what our feminism and what our feminisms do in the world, right? So I think if we're thinking about an orientation towards the world and first of all understanding the ways in which gender always entangled, always in intersection with other kind of destructive systems of power reorganizes the world. I think it's really important that we take difference seriously beyond lip service, right? I mean, I think that it's yes, of course, there's much that joins us, but I think that it's that our orientation and how we deal with difference really matters. I think one of the lessons we learn from movements that have any kind of successes is the recognition that it's only a movement if it is able to make sense of and work with the differences within the movement. While it's wonderful to imagine that we're all exactly the same, we know that this doesn't really work. This is not really how you change and remake the world, right? And so I think that, but of course, difference is a difficult aspect for various movements within the left, whether we're talking about kind of feminist movements or whether we're talking about liberation, kind of anti-colonial and black radical movements. There's been an over-emphasis on difference as something that's divisive. I think that part of the strength for me as an African feminist and part of what I find incredibly energizing in African feminisms and an Afrofeminist thought is the absolute what is the word I'm looking for? The absolute impossibility of getting around the fact that as much as we are similarly constituted, we also have to bring a whole range of very different, very historicized consciousnesses and strategies into what we can call an Afrofeminist a movement. And of course, recognizing within that difference is not something that happens all on the same plane, right? That even as people of the African world who are located in various and African feminists who have to think about ourselves in terms of kind of universes that both center ourselves and ones that kind of define us through marginality always at the same time, that even we are not located similarly, that our feminisms don't have the same kinds of circulatory powers, right? And therefore that the difference is not just something about recognition. It's also a constant invitation to think about how power plays itself out within movements of not just women versus within kind of liberation movements that are black liberation movements, but also within kind of African world feminist spaces. I don't know if I'm being clear, so maybe I'll give a few examples. So when I think about, I mean, I agree with much of what Fania says. I think for me, part of what's really useful in thinking about in using Afrofeminism, both in Fania's sense and in Sylvia Tamale's sense, is that it's a framework that is able to hold the tributaries that come from different feminisms and feminist energies of the African world, right? Whether they're diasporic or continental, and understanding that continental is a whole range of things. Continental African feminisms are a whole range of things, and there's different traditions and different sensitivities and different exuberances, and that when we're thinking also similarly about African diasporic feminisms, that even those then, and that structures of visibility and prioritizations are not on the same level. So I suppose for me, the direct answer then to your question is that we have to take difference quite seriously, and that and recognize that appropriation is not inevitable, and that also that yesterday one of the I can't remember now which of my co-panelists said that kind of stressed the importance of being able to listen, to tune our ears to hearing at different frequencies, right? And hearing at different frequencies, even when we're thinking about African or Afrofeminist worlds, not just in relation to what is outside of Afrofeminist worlds. And I think that's one of the ways in which we then kind of think about difference, and we're able to borrow and be in conversation with each other, recognizing that there are different traditions. The similarities and both the differences and the similarities are part of the richness, and not something that we should be afraid of. So that's I hope that answers you, Tessa.
Yeah, that was an incredible answer. Thank you so much. And for putting it so specifically. And Tiffany, you also work a lot around transnational feminism. So how do you feel like that plays into that? I also think, by the way, we can use this mic.
We can use that one.
So.
Okay, I've got this one already.
Yeah.
Hello.
Just that we have one more. We don't need to always be changing.
Okay. That's a really good question, Tessa. I do agree with both Fania and Pumla that there's something about the different frequencies of feminism that matter. And I think for my own work, it's important to sort of stress that, like, black German women had their own frequency of feminism that emerged. Certainly drawing from a variety of diasporic traditions across the globe, African feminisms, African American feminisms, Caribbean feminisms, Black British feminisms, all of these are important feminisms, but there's also a homegrown feminism here that they nurtured and that they actually facilitated and allowed them to really make changes. And that feminism was very much not cis heteronormative. That was a queer type of feminism. It was a queer sense of belonging that they also forged. And so for me, it's important to sort of, so people are like, Black Germans exist? So this is my research field in which are like, Black Germans exist? And I'm like, yes. Certainly not in that voice, not in that voice. That's not a professorial voice. That's not a professorial voice. But so I'm basically trying to situate that there are multiple Black German feminists that are in the tradition of Claudia Jones, that are in the tradition of Mary Church Terrell. They're similar, but also dissimilar. And I think what's, for me, fascinating, and also a mantra that is personal and professional, connect to differences. We don't have to be the same. Audre Lorde's idea of connect to differences. We don't have to be the same, but we need to come together to recognize our differences. And only through that recognition, through recognizing the contours of Blackness, the contours of feminism, the contours of Germanness, contours of Europeanness, can we then really get down to the nitty-gritty of the work. And so for me, it's seeing how Black German women were connecting to a vast network of global South feminists. Global South feminists from Brazil, from South Africa, from New Zealand, Maori women in New Zealand, all adapting this notion of Black feminism that was both political and cultural, but also effective. Like, it allowed them to cohere and connect in ways that matter without, ignoring the differences that existed. And I think Pumla was right that, I think divisiveness is when people see difference, they're like, oh my gosh, she's, they're a problematic figure. But divisiveness has never really been about disunion. It's about union. It's about forging connections through those differences. And I think that's where, especially for my work, that I see it so profoundly visible in Black German feminist movements, as well as in Black German movements more broadly. So if we think about like anti-colonial movements, like we oftentimes think about Black German activism as like 80s, 90s. And for me, it's like linking that anti-colonial activism from the interwar period in Weimar. That too has resonances of feminism that we need to sort of articulate and engage with. And so I think also this sort of interest in terms of thinking about like Black German feminisms, certainly drawing from Black American feminisms, but also really creating a really distinct type of feminism that is very much tied to acknowledging the differences. Like, it's not ignoring those differences. It's always been attentive to those differences. And there's been disunion in terms of, like, when we think about social movements more broadly, there's been contention. Social movements don't mean everyone's getting along and they're hugging and they're kissing and they're like, woohoo, we love you. Social movements are about conflict in ways. And those conflicts don't necessarily mean that you can't still get the work done. It means that you have to, conflicts exist. When we think about 19th century abolitionists, they were not hanging out all together. They were divisive. When we think about, even when we think about first wave, even though I hate the wave metaphor for feminisms, so suffragettes, they were really in conflict with African-American women who were like, hello, you've forgotten us. And so I think we need to recognize that conflicts need to happen. They help to push those ideas further in ways that advance these movements. And so this is what I see transnational feminism doing. It pushes, it advances a variety of issues. Transnational feminism, Black feminism, Afrofeminisms have never been single issue movements. They've always been about a variety of diverse movements pushing to the fore. It's not only about recognition, it's about rights. It's about articulating and recognizing the sort of racial politics that exist, the anti-colonial politics that exist. And so all of this is what I see as transnational feminism, global South feminism, really attached to this idea of like class, the class implications too, the sort of also tied to a colonial legacy, and also attentive to like affect and connection and what those mean. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, amazing, thank you so much. And I also think what excites me so about your work and all of your work, but is also that you work a lot on the like transnational or like the Black German experience and its transnational influences and the feminism. But at the same time, you also carry this transnationalist tradition further through your work. And it's this, where it all becomes a continued journey, really. Which is such an important work, and such, which comes out of all of a lot of the discussion today, is this, it is always a lifelong, really process, even though we've been aware of it since the very first moments. It's learning to name it and learning to delve further into it. And something also, Tiffany, that you just addressed a lot is the self-evident intersectionality of Afrofeminisms, that is just there as an obvious thing, that we don't feel the need, like that we realize eventually we need to make more evident, but that for a lot of us is so self-evident. And there is, of course, the concept of intersectionality, which was also coined by a African-American lawyer and feminist, Kimberly Crenshaw. And there is something, though, happening with that term in terms of it being whitewashed, in terms of it being appropriated and taken out of its very obvious Black feminist context. What do you think, what is happening around there? What are the dynamics and the dangers of that? Emilia.
I'd like to say something about difference, because I think it's so important. I mean, it's the core. It's the core of what we're talking about when we're speaking about Black feminism, Afrofeminism, global third world feminism, and that's we should, in my mind, never separate different from hierarchies, and that's what tends to be done when we speak about differences in a way that is dissolved from sexist hierarchies, racist hierarchies, classist hierarchies, and also geographic hierarchies. And if we do that, this is when we can unleash the full potential of Black feminism and not stay at the level of we're different, look at us, right? Because most of the time, this is what it boils down to. And if we try to understand that there is Black feminism because there has been a racist hierarchy with white women, because white women and white feminists have used Black bodies to access power. And they have done that in very significant and systematic ways, right? We were speaking about the suffragettes. This is exactly the discourse that they were investing in by saying to the white man, look, you need us, white women, to access to more power in order to establish and reinforce the white supremacy as a system. We will be the ones bringing the white race to another level. Right, and so by doing so, this is how solidarity was not possible. And so many times when we speak about white feminism, when we speak about Black feminism, we tend to represent it as, oh, white women just forgot. White women were not thinking of Black women. No, they were exactly thinking about Black women, and they were using Black bodies, Black people, in order to access more power in the hierarchy. And so I think this is what needs to be really central. And in that thing, when we speak about Black feminism and Afrofeminism, we need to speak about masculinity. We need to speak about Black men. And I think that's something that is many, many times left out of the conversation, simply because we have, especially Black women, this pressure of remaining solidary. Right, we are not allowed. There is some form of implicit rule that is hung on to us that no matter what happens, we need to show solidarity to Black men. We need to be behind them. We need to be the ones holding the community together. So that's an enormous emotional labor that is imposed on Black women, that is not imposed on Black men, because where is the solidarity of Black men when there are sexist episodes happening, when we are speaking about rape and reproductive justice for Black women? We want to see that. So that's why I want to shift the discourse a little bit on what Black women are doing and how they're, negotiating differences within the Black feminist movement and really trying to shift it to another level. And here, one thing that is important to mention is that hegemonic masculinity, right? The basis, the foundation of patriarchy, of Eurocentric, capitalist, imperialist patriarchy is white, male, cis, heterosexual, and non-disabled men. Right, they are the hegemonic masculinity that exert power on the rest of the world, right? So going from white women to Black men to nature and animals and everything, right? But in masculinity, there are also different types of masculinity. There is, and that's Connell, who an Australian feminist who made a differentiation of different masculinities. There is the subordinate masculinity, right? So it means masculinity, men who perform masculinity in a way that is not fully coherent with hegemonic masculinity. There is marginalized masculinity, and we're speaking here of Black masculinities, of Arabic, Muslim masculinities, Jewish masculinities. And those marginalized masculinities are also embedded in this hierarchy because they suffer from hegemonic white masculinity, and at the same time, they still hold patriarchal power. They still hold, they are in a position to exert male dominance. And we need to talk about that. That is so central to the discussion that we need to have when we're speaking about Black feminism, because we can't, or at least I don't want to leave men out of the conversation. I don't want to leave Black men out of the conversation. I want to be able to speak about this in an open way. I want to speak about the care work within Black communities. I want to speak about the different roles of power, who's speaking for the Black community. I want to speak about, also the lack of visibility of queerness within the Black community in order to also hold some form of patriarchal power. All of these topics are so important, and I want to be able to center them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Did you want to say? Okay. I think, I'm making a brain fart. Sorry.
That's all right.
And I just said fart twice.
Yeah, Emilia, that's a great point in terms of thinking about Black masculinity, which I think
we oftentimes don't recognize, especially when I think about to the Combahee River Collective. Like, they are not wanting to be separated from African American men. I mean, the document created in the 70s is, I mean, this is where the origins of intersectionality emerge, really. They are not wanting to be separate, and like, they are aware of those gendered contours between men and women, African American men and women. And so I think I see that also with Black German feminism and Black German activism more broadly. They do not want to, they want to work with Black German men. They want to get into those, you know, to those tough tension, those tough conversations about sexism, misogynoir, homophobia, transphobia that also emerges. And so I think these are very productive spaces that are not about just, you know, women occupying these spaces. It's about sharing these spaces with Black men. It's about working together with Black men, and it's about getting into those challenges. And really fighting those out and allowing them to understand, look, this is where you're positioned, and you're tethered to patriarchy in ways that you may not understand. And so I see them as doing that type of work too. But I think simultaneously, especially when you think about like, when I think about Black German activism more broadly, it's so, you know, it's so tied to queer women. It's tied to queer Black women who are all about bringing a queerness to Black German activism more broadly. And what I mean by that is that it's really challenging heteronormativity, but it's also challenging normative practices, normative identities, normative notions of belonging, and all of these things. And I think in many ways, like, I like to think of like Sylvia Wynter's work. Maybe not everyone likes to think about her work, but in particular, it's productive because when we think about Enlightenment thinking from the 1700s, it already, the universal subject is a male. He is white. He is classed in a particular way. He is non-disabled. He is not queer. And the sort of the counter to that is the non-human, is the marginalized subjects. And I think with Black German activism more broadly, it's a sense to sort of challenge this idea of what normal is, what a sense of normalcy is. And so Black German identity already queers things up because it's not supposed to be there. And so I think that, in a way, is very much tied to this larger understanding of like Black masculinity, Black German masculinity, Black German queerness, Black German femininity, and quite frankly, like, you know, thinking about what is considered to be the non-norm and why those challenges are so important. So they're countering hegemonic constructions of Germanists, they're countering hegemonic constructions of cisnormativity, and all of that in an effort to say, look, we exist. We've been existing for centuries. Now you take us on our own, whether you like it or not. So I think that's important to stress.
Yeah, if I can just add on that. Sorry, Fania, I hope we're not forgetting you.
Fania has also already, yeah.
I mean, I think that there's absolutely, I mean, I don't think you can talk about difference as though we're not talking about power. I think to talk about difference is always to talk about power. And I think that if I'm thinking about kind of some of the spaces in which my own work is located, or some of the people I think with and through, certainly an engagement with the ways in which we become gendered is central to that. I mean, whether I don't know that we are able to trace any kind of historical location of any kind of Afrofeminism, African feminism, Black feminism, without always having to think about an engagement with masculinity. I mean, I just recently was on a panel, or maybe not so recently, a few weeks ago, a panel for a film that's a Ghanaian film, feminist film that's just about to be released, which traces about 80 years of women's, of Ghanaian kind of radical women's kind of organizing, right? And of course, part of it is an engagement with nationalism and anti-colonialism and with the patriarchy within patriarchal articulation and definitions of Africanness and Blackness and masculinity and femininity and sexuality and legality and kind of how you then kind of hook into ideas of a global Blackness or a global Pan-Africanness. And so it seems to me that so certainly when I speak about taking difference seriously, I mean within that. So difference is not just a free-floating difference. It's always it always has, if you take it seriously, it always has to be an engagement with power. And I think much of the articulation of Afrofeminist sensibility at different times. I mean, whether we're looking at kind of more recent articulations in BLM, or roads must fall, or fees must fall, or and so on, or whether we're taking a much longer historical approach. In fact, I think if we are attentive to that articulation, we see, in fact, a constant interrogation of how masculinity, how Black masculinities, how African masculinities are a gendered project that does certain kinds of work, and how that the kind of masculine articulation works in both in response to whiteness, but also works within Blackness and within kind of African kind of radical spaces in ways that are sometimes interesting and sometimes destructive. And I think that's an important reminder. And of course, also to think about, which is, I think, probably a point that I'm belaboring a little bit, that we cannot actually think about a colonial inheritance. We cannot think about white supremacy without thinking always about the way in which it is made through gendered violence. Like colonialism is made through rape. White supremacy is made through gendered violence, physically and metaphorically. I think that we're going to find that regardless of the particular manifestations are going to differ in different places. But I think if we look at the work of kind of feminists from different places, whether you're looking at kind of Latin American located feminists looking at at some of the ways in which the logic of war that is important for coloniality is constructed, or whether you're looking at South Asian feminists, or you're looking at kind of feminists of the African world, wherever located. When we're looking at the feminist work that unapologetically looks at kind of histories of not just of our movements, but of the movements that we form ourselves in response to, there's always the kind of attempt to center the ways in which masculinity, in which white supremacy, white supremacist masculinity, at a definitional, at a physical, at an embodied level, is the difference. And I think then finally, within Afrofeminisms, it's always interesting to me the kinds of differences that we, not this panel, I just mean more broadly, that we are also ourselves queasy about. And it's always fascinating to me to notice which Black feminisms are qualified and which ones are not qualified, and what that work is doing. So for example, you have to say Black German feminisms, you have to say Black British feminisms. You look at the books, right? And then there are other books that are just Black feminisms, right? And so I think that it's a difficult moment, it's an uncomfortable moment. But if we're talking about part of what Afrofeminists, wherever located, bring to how we remake the world, being a serious, historicized, polyvocal imagination, we also have to think about what the self-reflexivity within the larger global movement needs to look like. And I think that's an important one. It's a difficult one, but if we're saying difficulty is productive, and if we're saying engaging with the hierarchies that we respond to is important, we also have to think about the hierarchies that we perhaps replicate or turn our eyes away from within our own movements.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually going to pass on straight to Fania, because you also wanted to pitch in there.
Yeah, I think that Yeah, it made me thinking about the fact that I take really at heart and really seriously all the work, amazing work that Horton Spiller, Sylvia Winter, Joy James, and Seja Hartman are producing about the idea of what Blackness does to gender, that the question of the destabilization of gender that Blackness produces, the destabilization of what is mean, the agenda linked to Blackness, and I think it's really an important theoretical question, but also political question when we see that how the politics, sexual politics around Black women and certain type of women to know if they're a woman, if they're man, if they can run in some competition. So this question of the gender, what kind of gender Blackness produce is really important, and it's really a question that help to complexify and also produce another type of poetry, because I'm really aware of all the whitewashing around intersectionality, and so that's a problem. But in a chapter that I wrote for the book Feu, abécédaire des féministes présents, was coordinated by Elsa Dorla, I wrote a chapter about the circulation of intersectionality, and one of the big chunk of that, it was not about the whitewashing, but more likely about what people on our side, and I taking side really broadly, not as politically sharp, that do with intersectionality. And I think that we have also to think about all the neoliberal and liberal pitfall that fall through, that when people took a theoretical tool, because it's what it is, it's a tool, and make it the alpha and the omega of all the political stance, all the political analysis, all the political production, is meant that it's become a synonym of diversity, synonym of, oh, we fighting against everything. But what I learned, it's been 15 years since I am an activist in different kind of movement and different capacities. I learned that I have 24 hours and 8 hours to sleep and life, that you can fight against everything in the same place. It's not possible. It's not possible. It's less possible in collective, political collective, with a lack of resources, lack of people, lack of money, under state surveillance and violence. It's not possible. So what we do back and forth. We do Black feminist, Afrofeminist mobilization. We go in a Black or larger Black organization. We go in a anti-police violence organization. We do back and forth. But the reality of Black feminist movement, Afrofeminist movement, and the Black movement in Europe in the era of waves of ethno-fascism, of police violence during protests, that have no such a thing of one organization fighting everything. So the kind of organization that does that, they do Instagram posts. So they have a word about every struggle, but it's not serious. A serious political matter is have to have a great analysis on the struggle you are in. And I think people have to know that. For me, my interest is really how a movement, that say the radical movement led by Black women, but also women of color, or other marginalized people about racism, produce neoliberalism by lack of strength about what their politics is, about doing some kind of easy answer to everything. So I think it's really important in the time where we are in France, where I think the party with more deputy in the assembly it was a party formed by Vassan SS collaborator. So I think it's really dangerous, and I think that in this time of it's really a scary time. It is kind of really scary time, and the Islamophobia and racism. I think that complexified politics is really important, and what we have to do is create balance of power. The balance of power is by to create a large strength and large movement, but to be also really good on where we are and really good where we are needed to. So is what I'm talking about, more about the urgency, the what happened in Europe and especially in France in terms of race, ethno-nationalism, and neoliberalism inside of a movement that say that they want change.
Yeah, thank you all. It's we've actually delved into the next 2-3 questions already because exactly of this, it is all so connected. We can't look at one of these issues without looking at the whole picture and constantly opening up these new areas and perspectives we have to look at. And like you also said, it is difficult and it has to be difficult. And it is a continued journey. So we've really delved into that. And maybe just picking up on that with you, Fania, because once we open one pot, it just keeps down that line. And something that you also kind of addressed, but that also you address in your work, you're there, is that we ultimately, a lot of it also comes down to, we have to also look at power dynamics. So we have to look at the redistribution, redefinition, or also more accurate definition of power also within exactly these Black contexts, because no movement, no social movement, no social justice can exist without feminism behind it. Fania, maybe you want to continue just on that for a bit, like how do we get to that redefinition of power?
I think that movement have not to be scared of power, so we have to imagine the condition of how we take power, how we exercise power, and what it means. Because as Georgian say, she said that she doesn't believe any dream that not consider the possibility of nightmare. So I think that movement that not consider the possibility of nightmare, the possibility of feeling, the possibility of violence, of the need of violence, how they use to violence, have serious problem with that. So I think that, thinking about power, thinking how power are imposed to us, but also what we're going to do with power, what we're going to do to take power, what we are willing to do to take power, with whom we're willing to do localized association, even though they're not really aligned to that, and also have the Black activist, I'm an Afrofeminist. I came really to the strong belief that I don't think social justice will end anti-Blackness, that maybe social justice will make things better for most of the people, but I don't think social justice will be the answer to anti-Blackness. I think the anti-Blackness is a deep, deep-rooted issue that organizes the way the humanity and non-human dealing with each other, that social justice will be not enough. So consider the possibility of nightmare is consider that after all the fight and the day after the end of the world, that maybe we'll still have anti-Blackness, and what we're gonna do about that. So I think it's a question. So if even power is not enough to end Blackness, if even power and even and social justice mobilization is not enough, what we're gonna do about that? What we can do about that? So this is a question that a bit obsessing with me, because I think that it's important. It's because I'm Haitian, so I believe that I believe in the 1804 way of winning. So I really believe that violence is sometimes the way of winning. So this is the Haitian in me. So I think that movement have to understand that the racial capitalism, the capitalism of surveillance, the fact that the militarization of police makes it almost impossible to protest in the street now without not facing the loss of some part of your body or be killed. And so what we're gonna do when I have nation in Europe, in the US, but also in Africa, turned the police into kind of Robocop of the Star Wars army of stormtrooper. So what we're gonna do about that? So this is a really serious question about violence, power, and well-being too of activists.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts and questions on that. And Emilia.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, what you say about anti-blackness, that it's so deeply rooted in every structure, every thought, it's so central to oppression. And I think this is where we need to start. So why is anti-blackness so central to all other forms of oppression? Well, it comes from, and that's Frantz Fanon, who conceptualized oppression from the line of the human. And from the moment where Black people were declared non-human, and the most non-human form of subhumanist, and I think that's important because there were different levels in that hierarchy. Well, it relied on the belief that what is not human can be destroyed. What is not human can be possessed, it can be destroyed, it can be exploited, and that's the consensus that currently exists as well within humanity, right? That and that's what I at least as an opening to solving, or at least to going against anti-blackness, or at least trying to find or tackle the root of it. I think about Black veganism, the Black veganist movement, that is really trying to destroy or to go against this thought and saying what is not human is also worthy of respect. What is not human is also worthy of liberation. And I think this is something that a lot of Black people, a lot of Black movement have a lot of difficulty with, because this association with animals has been so painful. It has been so something that is highly triggering. It's transgenerational trauma from over 600, 500 years. And in that sense, I think we need to heal this trauma by understanding that the lack of humanness that has been attached to Black bodies, to Black people, is not something that we should separate ourselves from. Instead, and I really strongly believe in it, we should engage in a paradigmatic shift that is so profound that would come to a place where we don't see animals, we don't see nature, we don't see the non-human as something that needs to be destroyed, as something that needs to be dominated. Because otherwise what happens is that we merely shift the filter of humanity. So we include more people to the humanity club, so to say, the people who cannot be destroyed, who cannot be exploited, who cannot be killed. But as long as and I think our task is, instead of shifting it, and instead of shifting it shifting, sorry, for lack of a better word, I wanted to find something better, but I can't, so it's okay. It's to destroy the filter altogether. And destroying the filter of humanity is the most difficult thing that we have to do, simply because this is not what we've learned. White women have learned that to access power, they need to denigrate Black people. Black men, and I'm generalizing, right? But it's not all Black men, it's not all white women. But Black men have learned that in order to access power, they have to denigrate women. And this is what we need to unlearn. We need to unlearn to rely on the inferiorization of other people to access humanity. And in that sense, Black veganism is, for me, a very wise perspective, something that speaks to me so deeply and that we should invest in. And that's a difficult task, I guess, because it's not so popular.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. That's so well put. In a way, we need to completely reconstruct. That is what we're also looking for, aiming for. But at the same time, we are, of course, coming from what we've learned and how we've been shaped by patriarchy and power systems. Maybe Pumla, Tiffany, maybe have you got thoughts on how can we make this reconstruction, or rather deconstruction and reconstruction, how can we further this? with the black feminist self-evidence?
Well, I mean, I think I'm thinking. So my answer is going to be very messy. Well,
That's all right.
With multiple.
It's a messy world.
Tentacles. So I'm thinking about our conversation for those people who were yesterday about disposability. So I think the point you're making is a very important one when we're thinking about kind of relationships of kind of black people, African descended people, African continental, whatever, Afro people, and disposability and those histories of disposability, but also ongoing realities that make that relationship, that naturalize that relationship on the one so that's one tentacle. I want to also, I'm thinking about, I'm really kind of energized by what you're saying around rethinking the boundaries, or a particular way of thinking of rethinking the boundaries between the human and the animal, which I think is a very important intervention. I'm thinking, for example, that because of course the ways in which we often don't pay enough attention to the ways in which the filters and the classification systems, so the intellectual and ideological and academic and political ones, are also tied into these histories of kind of reifying that distinction. So, for example, if I'm thinking about the work of someone like the historian Yvette Abrahams, who, for example, shows who's an South African Namibian historian, feminist historian, and some of her work, because she's a scholar of kind of history of Khoi historiography, does a lot of work on exactly the fascination with blurring that difference between inscribing and reinscribing and reifying, but also kind of blurring it. So, for example, some of the historiography of people like Cuvier and all of those people, the bodies that were being tested, the Southern African women's bodies that were being tested, the genitalia that were being pickled, their brains that were being pickled, some of which are still in museums in France. So it's not a completed and finished history, but the entanglement of that very classification system with the idea of what race is in both in the kind of contemporary ways in which we use race, but in the kind of older ways in which kind of race, human, non-human, those boundaries. And of course, for a long time, the Khoi women, which is a kind of ethnicity, well, is it an ethnicity? Okay, I'm just going to use the word ethnicity loosely. Within an ethnicity within Southern Africa, and very often for a long time, there's volumes and volumes of academic literature in Europe that says this is the missing link. That these women these bodies are the exact link between the animal and the human. And so I suppose when we are thinking about troubling those boundaries, right? We have to attend to some of those, to what that history does for those who are always already constructed, not only as animal by virtue of being African, but the specific Africans who are the link between, in historical science, kind of science, but also, as I say, this is not a history that is complete, because those people's body parts in many ways still continue to be in those. But I don't think, like you, I don't think that being attentive to that wound and that difficulty then means that we don't think about what it might mean to shape the kinds of lenses that are attentive to that history but do different kinds of work. I think the important and the value for me in Afrofeminism is its unapologetic investment in making the world differently, right? Being historicized, but not simply saying, well, we're just going to respond to the history. And so that's part of what I'm finding so exciting about that invitation from you, Emilia, about, well, what are the lenses what are the ways of thinking about this history and engaging with this history that allow us to remake the world, not just respond. I mean, respond, of course, we have to respond, but also, are there ways in which we can free ourselves conceptually to think in imaginative ways that allow us to be at the center of our own universes and not simply be reacting, responding, da 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 da.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Woo. That was good. I think there's a variety of things at play. I think sort of going back to the sort of initial discussion about power and agency. I mean, we need to sort of think about power in a variety of ways. And I think in terms of thinking about Sarah Baartman and Columbia, I think what's interesting about Sarah Baartman, for years he was nagging her about, looking at her body. And there's only one instance of her, there's not a lot of documentation in terms of Sarah Baartman speaking out in her own way, but there's one documentation about her saying no to him, and that represents agency. That represents her challenging the system. That represents her offering a sense of liberation, even though he's for years was nagging her about, I want to see your body, I want to see your body. I mean, he eventually did get her body, but when she was alive, she had agency. She had enough to say, no, you can't have it. And I think that matters in terms of how we think about reimagining worlds, how we think about agency, how we think about documentary evidence, what constitutes evidence. And so for me, that's a really wonderful example of her asserting her agency. And simultaneously, I think there's some really wonderful ways to sort of do that. I think these movements, Afrofeminist movements in the past and their presence, were doing that. They were sort of challenging and trying to recreate a world that was just, that it was attentive to a variety of intersectional oppressions, that really was trying to sort of make these worlds anew. In different ways. So there was not one full plan to do this. There were sort of multiple paths to achieve this. And so I think that's an important notion, and important idea to sort of remember, and that too feel that Afrofeminisms and sort of feminisms, feminisms rooted in a sort of Black sense of self are important for doing just that. That they trouble the waters. They allow us to see power in a variety of ways. They allow us to see agency and liberation in a variety of ways that are not indicative of, that are also not always in opposition to whiteness. That they stand on their own. And so I'm thinking of the work of Kevin Kwashi, who talks about this concept of Black aliveness. That Black aliveness isn't necessary, Black aliveness just exists. Blackness exists on its own without always having to be in conversation with whiteness or challenging whiteness. It can just be in all of its totality. It doesn't necessarily have to always respond to racism, discrimination. And so that is, Blackness in its totality, ambiguous, joy, problematic, bold, all of that can be. And I think that's what's so interesting about Afrofeminisms. It represents Black aliveness, untethered by racism, even though racism is there. It's not saying that they're ignoring it, but they're not allowing racism to dictate how they live, how they be, how they know, what they think. And I think that's an important aspect of Afrofeminisms. And quite frankly, Black feminisms more broadly. But I like this notion of we can't always, racism's horrible. We clearly know this. This is not, it's like, but we can't allow it to dictate how we are, how we function, how we manifest ourselves. And I think that's what Black aliveness is. And that is certainly represented in Afrofeminism. It's like that Blackness in its uncontained messiness. That it's allowed to be, messy, good, bad, whatever it needs to be to exist in a society that doesn't think Blackness needs to have a space. It carves out a space for Blackness that is not one or the other. It allows us from polyvocal notion of Blackness, a multivocal notion of Blackness, and an effective notion of Blackness that's not tied to any one epistemology. That's what I think Afrofeminisms represents, and it also represents this notion of course, there's no sort of. I think when we think about a variety of Black traditions, Black diasporic traditions, animals are a part of it. That's like, that's, I think, the sort of that's again going back to this notion of what colonialism does. It creates one type of epistemology, one type of way of learning, living, being, knowing. And I think that's what the sheer existence of Black peoples across the globe is a counter to that. And when we see this sort of, we see these traditions across. We see these traditions in Brazil. When you think about a variety of like religious traditions, candomblé in Cuba, like there are ways of having, there are ways of being and knowing that transcend racism and white supremacy, that they exist on their own, and that's important. Hopefully, I made sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
People are like, oh.
Thank you so much. I just want to add something because you said it so beautifully. And I think this is you gave us a definition of liberation, right? Liberation can happen when we free ourselves from the validation of the oppressor. And it seems like a very simple thing to do, but for example, also separating, or at least it's like in psychological abuse, because oppression is a form of psychological abuse. Not trying to escape this condition, not the condition of animals, but trying to escape the effect it has, right? By saying, okay, yes, we're animals, who are you? It's just like, it sounds violent, the phrase, like saying the phrase is really violent because we're still so embedded in this frame of thought, in this paradigm, but maybe in a few generations, we will have come to that place.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've delved right into really what I wanted to ask as a last question before we would also like to take some audience questions. And it's amazing actually how much you've answered today without even needing to put those questions out there. Because you are just full of answers and knowledge. And you've touched upon it now, Tiffany. It's this, what are perspectives, visions, plans for Afrofeminist futures? Like, if we could just have a few words of like visions we'd love to have, or already realities we have already, which is something that you just shared upon, Tiffany. Yeah. Anyone who wants to really, or Fania also.
I think that the future is like I think it's for the future is the end of the world and making another one. I think I think we can at this point of this world, you can decolonize the colonization, and I think the world just colonization. Like you can have something that you can decolonize, and I think you can decolonize the politic of death that organize the way we're living with each other, with the other being on the planet, with yourself. So I think I think it's that. I think that have to be bold and to start over not in a blank page, but to start something that organize or want something here that violates domination and death. And I think that the future is after the end of this logical of death that we're living in, and after that. And I think after that, because I think that we can see just as far as we are in terms of freedom. And I really hope that have a other horizon of freedom that we can see really far away, that no prison is really a good it's a really good horizon. No police is a good horizon. World with that white supremacy and anti-blackness, because white supremacy and anti-blackness are two different things. I think that white supremacy can disappear, but the anti-blackness can stand. So with that patriarchy, cis-hetero patriarchy, with the other way to live with other, I think that is really beautiful horizon. But I have the feeling that if we were further, we could see all the kind of horizons like that deploy, in front of, because we're not we don't see enough now. We're not on the top of the mountain. So if we go on the top of the mountain, we can just see all the kind of freedom, shared resources, happiness, and we can. I'm sure that have all the right of other types of right, other type of freedom, other type of the way to be with each other that we didn't imagine yet. So it's for that I am an activist, because I know that I acknowledge my own limitations, that I can't imagine them yet because I'm too deep inside the freedom that I try to get now, and I try to get in the year for my children that I don't have yet, but if I have, but I'm sure that other kind of generation will imagine far beyond me, and I think it's that, but far beyond this world. So I think the future is what we can see, because we're not free enough now, just now.
That's really beautifully put. Thank you for that. And with that, I'd love to actually open up the possibility as well to audience questions, if there's anyone in the room. I think it makes sense if we come around with a mic to you. Yeah, thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much to all of you. This was absolutely fantastic, phenomenal, and significant education for me personally. I'm always curious when any person decides to stand up for something or fight for something or speak up against something. There's a limit to that principle. I think our panelist from New York mentioned something on that. You can't fight every fight. And in making that decision, whether it's light or not, you are actively deciding to ignore something significant in someone significant or an entity of significance. I know personally what I've had to reconcile for myself and accept. I'm curious, I suppose the demons you may have when the fights you've let go of, even still understanding that I should still be fighting. Yeah, if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Is it a question to anyone specific or in general?
No, anyone in general, really.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we're gonna maybe do one at a time, but maybe only one person answer, I'd say, rather, or do we? Yeah, we can do as well. Then we collect.
Actually, I can specify then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. We're just talking about the structure of doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Right next to you, there's another question, so you can just pass it on.
Thank you.
Yeah, and one over there.
Mine's particularly to Emilia. And it's in that ranking, I think that was very accurate, sort of the ranking of the patriarchy ranking you did. I'd like if you could say a couple of words, what role the Bible plays in this, because I don't know about other countries, but in Kenya, we can't escape from the Bible says, according to verse this. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There were two more over there.
Hello, everyone. My question is also not specific to one person, so whoever wants to answer can answer. And it's not very well articulated, but in relation to us speaking about feminism, a lot of the discourses we have now are discourses we have on social media. And obviously there's like this polarization of what feminism is, and I think this third wave of feminism has come under attack, particularly in the things that are happening in the US, and you know this wave that we are having of the delegitimization of women's rights, right? And like as we were talking, like since yesterday, the question that has been ruminating in my head is that, how do we have these conversations where you actually articulate it in layman's terms, right? Because even, you know, I love hearing this, but in my head I'm always like, it's always so hard to articulate it to a person who is just like sitting, like your aunt, right? What I learned is that if you can't explain something to someone in like in a regular language, you clearly do not understand what it means, right? And I like when Pumla spoke about the Ghana a movie or documentary, and I thought that would be like very interesting, because it's not that people do not understand these movements, right? But it gets so congested with, like, sorry to say, but nonsense, right? Where people don't actually have, it's also access, right? We don't have access. So it's like then these echo chambers that we have these discussions in, I'm so sorry, I'm taking long, but these echo chambers that we have these discussions in, like, they frustrate me, you know, on a personal level, they frustrate me. So I guess that is the question that the answer that I want to leave with here, is that how do we bring this to a broader discussion? And also, like, one of my favorite quotes from Steve Biko, he speaks about the fact that in his time, the people that went to university are the people that were very good in articulation of our problems, right? And the mere fact that at that point he was speaking about university students, like, if you went to university, you can articulate. And even in these spaces, the type of people that are here are very specific, right? How do we move it outside the space?
Yeah, thank you. And we had one more question quickly, because then we'll want to take a couple of minutes to actually delve into answers as well.
Thank you for Afrolution. I would like to say thank you also for Afrolution to let us sit also for queerness in the room, because it's important. Also, we have always been there, despite the fact that we have been thrown in the white trash can. So, I would like to, it's more a request to address the spirituality actually in the movement, because there is this seat that is empty next to you, and I'm scared that they fill it with white Jesus. So I would like to have your perspective about the spirituality and how we can address that in the movement also.
Yeah, thank you. Well, there's a lot of great further topics to delve into, and I would actually like to start with Fania, because I know you have limited time now. So actually, I think pick what you want to react to from that.
Okay, I think I will answer to the question how we do about echo chamber, I think, and about the movement. So what me as part of a collective, different type of collective. I was part of the collective Moissy for a long year. I'm working with a Haitian feminist collective in Haiti. I was in Haiti last week, so that I get COVID. I was in Haiti, so I'm not in echo chamber, and because I'm in a movement that I think the echo chamber is being in a movement, because when the 6th year that I've been part of Moissy, every Sunday I was in a free market talking to people. We have to talk to people to give them, say, hey, do you hear about Afrofeminism? And people say no, so we have to explain what is it, and we have to Jehovah Witness. Some people say no, I don't want to do anything with you, but it's what we do, it's what movement do. They train actors, they train organizers, they train people that bring people and then bring willing to act. It's for that the echo chamber is more likely when you focus and that you own, desalienation, decolonization, but it's individual. And I think that it's really a point that I think that being decolonized by yourself doesn't change the material condition that you're living on. And I think materialism is really important. So collective is important for that. When I worked in Haiti, I was doing training for Haitian women that was incarcerated. That are incarcerated in Haitian Creole, that incarcerated about sexual violence, etc. So we're not in echo chamber when we are in a collective, because we have to get out of the street. We have to be on the street. We have to dealing with people. People come to us to our event asking a lot of great questions, but sometimes not great questions, but also antagonism, violence. People speak at us. It happened. So we do that, and after I'm not the one talking to my aunt, but I'm talking to somebody else's aunt. So, and somebody else talk to my own aunt because they don't have that. So I'm talking to my own aunt, but I'm talking to somebody's aunt every Sunday. And even now in my new collective, I'm talking to somebody else's aunt, mom, etc., to explain that. So it's what being in a collective, being in a political organization means, is that you be trained to explain what is your political strategy and your political matter, and you be trained to growth that link. And I think that I always repeat as I do training, ideological and theoretical training for different groups. I talk to people, a reminder that Ewan Newton, one of the founder of the Black Panther Party, at 18 had a functional illiteracy. He cannot really read, but he became the most brilliant thinker, theoretician of his generation, because and what we learn about is that you have to learn all the world. So you don't have to learn a light version of that because it's dangerous, that you give your ability to understand the complex of a theory to somebody else. And I think that movements are not on the forefront of some kind of avant-garde of the struggle. I think that struggle make people, struggle make a charismatic leader. It's because of struggle, it's because of the Algerian war that we had France Fanon, it's because of anti-colonial war that we have Thomas Sankara, is struggle that made people and that made movement. And the movement are here to get along the struggle. So we are here where the struggle are, and we bring the theory and we bring plan that when the real revolution will happen, because it will happen, that we not encounter counter-revolution or fascism, because fascists always have a plan. So all the kind of politics need a plan for when people seek security, that we need a plan is what we do. And I think that the best I think it's the best of, again, echo chamber, because as Mariam Kaba said, that never alone in a political collective.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's beautifully put. And thank you also for joining us so early in the morning for you, in case you have to head out now. But we'd also like to have some answers for the last couple of questions. Ooh, thanks.
Okay, so I'm trying to be concise. We have the Bible, we have spirituality, we have pick your battles, and the echo chamber question was already asked, but maybe one aspect is the intellectualism of it, right? Academic spaces, academic language. So the Bible and all monotheistic religions are deeply entrenched in patriarchy. It means that we cannot separate religions from the patriarchal system in which they emerged. So it's not the religion itself. So that's why any attempt to push patriarchy to a specific religion, let's say Islam, like it's the case in Europe, is misguided, and it's highly problematic. Even Buddhism is, Buddhism, which is very idealized and romanticized in Western countries, is highly patriarchal. Very, very misogynistic. So the Bible says women are inferior. It says black people are inferior. And this is not, spirituality for me. These are dogmas. So it means that we also need to separate the dogma and religion, which are institutions made by men, made by white men, and imported in the African continent and other parts of the world. So it means that there is no Kenyan church. There is a colonial Kenyan church that has been imposed onto Kenyan people. And then spirituality, which is the essence of who we are. It means that spirituality is us. It's within us. So whatever we do, whatever we, once we're connected to ourselves and each other, this is where spirituality is expressed, right? So for me, veganism and what I was saying earlier is deeply spiritual, because this is rethinking our essence in the world. It's rethinking our connection to other beings, to the universe. And so there will be no liberation without spirituality. I mean, Baruch says it much better than I do, but this is something that I deeply believe in and that I deeply think, because my spiritual awakening came separated from religion entirely, came at a time where my political awakening was at its highest, and where all the negative emotions of trauma, of anger, of self-hatred needed to be contained within a spiritual practice. Then to the question of, how can we make those thoughts, go beyond academic spaces or academic language? I want to say that, yes, of course, here on this stage, we all went to university, we teach at university, so we have a very clear academic privilege, for sure. At the same time, what we are saying, the teaching that we include, that we learned from, that formed our political consciousness, came from experience. Not only our experience, but the experiences of, Fania, you were speaking about Fanon, you were speaking, we can speak about so many voices, which are academic voices, and that has formed our thinking. And I think it's so important to realize that in the world in which we live, those voices manage to get some type of visibility because they entered the center of knowledge. They entered the center of what is described as knowledge in a colonialist, imperialist, white supremacist way, in patriarchal way. And it doesn't mean that this knowledge doesn't have its origin in a lived experience that is marginalized. And so I think many times I hear that from detractors of decolonial thought and anti-racist thought and feminist thought, and you hear them saying like, oh, this is way too complex. Intersectionality, how do you even say that word? It's too complicated. You from your position are trying to impose something highly complex and highly academic onto simple people. This is so classist, sorry, but this is such a classist discourse and narrative that is trying to prevent, because it's also saying, okay, you from your position as a Black person, you don't belong in universities. Your people don't belong there. You are not allowed to express yourself in such complicated language. This language is reserved from a certain type of people. So that's why I think we should be really worried, really, really careful of not going too much into this, or at least remembering where this knowledge comes from. The theories of liberation come from people who have experience and who experience oppression, and that's enough. And across class lines, classism is definitely an issue, and it's something that is really important to me that I keep bringing to the forefront, because we should not, we cannot afford to not speak about this. But this knowledge is knowledge that comes from experience, and I think we need to. We need to pay tribute to that and not feel ashamed of speaking in a certain language that has been denied to marginalized people, to women, to Black people, to people from the African continent, to Asia, etc., indigenous people as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm also going to just say a little bit about the question around the echo chamber. I mean, I think that I can't really say I can really relate to that question. I mean, I think that when we pay attention to where the locations of kind of African feminisms are in the world, it seems to me there's so much more evidence that that African feminist or Afrofeminist articulation is everywhere, and I mean I'm always amazed as someone who both is located in various kind of activist movements outside the academy and is very comfortably located in the academy, by this idea that the academy. That Afrofeminism is kind of flourishing in the academy, and that the academy is somehow hospitable to, because I mean, certainly I think in my experience it's the exact opposite, right? That the academy is incredibly hostile to this kind of articulation, first of all. And if we speak with confidence, if we speak as though we are at the center of the academy, it is precisely because we draw from spaces that are beyond the academy, and even while we unapologetically draw from each other's work and produce work within the academy ourselves. If anything, for me, one of the ways in which the academic discourses on feminism globally are most dangerous is in and I'm going to get into a lot of trouble here, not with my panelists, hopefully, co-panelists, hopefully, but with some other people, maybe, is in this characterization of feminism through waves, right? Because that is actually, for me, where the violence of feminism is in the academy. Because it forces Afrofeminisms, it forces third world feminisms to always be third wave, right? Whereas the history of Afrofeminist movements, I mean, if we look at the documents that the Federation of Southern African Women was writing in 1953, 1950, 1949, if we look at what the Ghanaian, various different kind of Ghanaian, like unionist market women organizations, and I'm not just talking about groups of women, I'm talking about radical, particularly kind of locating themselves and identifying themselves as doing political work. If we look at some of those that documentation coming out of the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, it becomes very difficult to be talking about the work. If you look at the work of, so there's long traditions of thinking of things that seem new now, right? But actually, when we do the archival work of looking at multi-generational, which is not a new thing, multi-generational, multi-class, multi-located, actual work by movements, unionists, like professional women, women who were traders, women who were different, young women in different health work, so different formations, we see, what am I saying? If we do the work of paying attention to the locations of Afrofeminist consciousness on the continent, in different parts of the diaspora, we actually see that this idea that this feminist consciousness comes from the academy is actually completely ahistorical, historically. But even in the contemporary moment, I mean, I think I'm going to speak quite narrowly now. If I think about those of us who are probably the most visible feminists in the Southern African Academy, none of us, if there is a women's studies tradition in Southern Africa, we started, right? But all of us are feminists already when we enter the academy. And which means we are made feminists in movements outside the academy. So if you're looking at my work, or if you're looking at Shireen Hassim's work, there were no women's studies. We are the first generation in the South African Academy to create those. So this idea, so actually then that is kind of tangible, more recent history.
Yeah, we've got like a couple of minutes. So
tangible evidence that actually it's not an academic discourse. It moves into the academy, and I don't think we should be apologetic about that. And I think that, yes, maybe here there's a particular tenure and combination and so on, but many of us are located in multiple spaces, and in fact, part of the work and the richness that we bring comes precisely because we don't have to go teach them. Actually, the teaching came from there. And then the spiritual.
Yeah.
2 sentences. Sorry. The spiritual.
I just want to have time for Tiffany as well.
I know. Sorry, Tiffany. I just think the spiritual one is a difficult one. So I come from a part of the world where, I mean, I know that fundamental Christianity is wreaking havoc in the world, and right wing and and yes, that. But I think that it's important to remember that sometimes, I think Tiffany said a little bit about this, I come from a part of the world where where people may go to church, but they also do a whole belong simultaneously or alternatively to a whole range of other spiritual systems. And I think often when we talk across the globe about spirituality, we think about it we think primarily in terms of kind of institutionalized global religions, right? And so I think that when we're talking about spirituality, sometimes we have to remember that not all of them go through, not all of kind of African world sensibility comes or it's predominantly through forms of spirituality that are kind of legible across the world. But I think it's very important to think about the place of the sexual and the place of the body and the place of the space and the place of the organization. And also to remember that even in countries that are highly Christianized and highly Muslim ordered, that very often that is not the dominant religion. all right? Or that even if it's dominant, there isn't a singular dominance. And sometimes people opt in and out, and sometimes it's the same people. It's not only kind of parallel structures. So often people will go to church and sing and whatever, and then they'll go to the nyanga or the Gqola or the sangoma, and they'll do whatever. And so sometimes there's this kind of simultaneity, which sometimes pulls them apart. Sometimes people work it together in different ways. So, sorry, I'm going to hand over to Tiffany now. I wanted to answer the difficult question from Tapiwa, but I don't think I have.
That's the question left. I could listen to you forever, but
I can't
Fania has had to go. We've still got the question of picking your battles.
Okay, picking the battles. Okay.
Quickly.
That's a really difficult question, but I think because I'm one of the few Black women historians who works on Germany, I was like one of the few who was tenured, that I try to like bring, as I'm climbing, I want all of us to be on the elevator together. So I'm trying to help people as much as I can. And that means that I can't do it all, but that's my primary focus. So like I want to have Black and POC women coming in with me, sharing this space with me, and helping to disseminate knowledge in a variety of ways. So that's the battle I've chosen, to the detriment of like not doing even more like human rights activism, which I used to do, which is sad for me, but also because the academy is so violent and so racist that I need to help this multiple generations of Black and POC women and have a space and feel like they are, that they belong. And so that's how I feel like I'm doing some like civil anti-racist work within the academy, even though I'm not like on the streets, you know, pounding on doors and saying, do you know about this? But that's also, that leaves me feeling sad because I miss doing some of the old activist stuff that I do. But I also have to reframe this as a new type of activism, which is why I try to frame, you know, activist work as also intellectual work. Like we oftentimes think of it not as only combating, you know, racism and the variety of isms that exist, but activism is intellectual labor. This is intellectual labor. You know, the Afrolution Festival, we are disseminating knowledge in ways that matter to a wider group of people. And so I think we need to really think about the ways that intellectualism has always been this sort of epoch of like, you know, Western civilization, when really it's never been that way. It's always been by marginalized people who are creating different types of knowledge, different types of epistemologies, cosmologies, ways of knowing and being that also are activism. So it's intellectual activism and it's radical. Okay, I hope that was short.
Thank you. Those are excellent final words. So, thank you. Fania has had to go, but thank you, Fania. Thank you, Emilia. Thank you, Pumla. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you to the team of EOTO and the Berlin Biennale for making this happening. And enjoy and watch the rest of the Afrolution Festival.
Yeah, thank you. That's your applause. And thank you, Tessa Hart. Fantastic chair. Thank you very much.